Hi all. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about Carl Cohen's The Case for the Use of Animals in Biomedical Research. And Cohen, pictured here, still alive, still teaching at the University of Michigan, I believe. His argument is going to have two parts. He's going to object to arguments that say we shouldn't use animals for biomedical research, so testing like vaccines and such. We shouldn't use them for that because it wrongly violates the rights of animals. He's going to say it doesn't violate the rights, specifically because they have no rights. And he's going to argue against the claim that it wrongly imposes on sentient creatures much avoidable suffering. He's going to say it does impose on them suffering, but it's better that it's imposed on them than human beings. So in sort of broad strokes, he's going to be objecting to Regan's rights theory. So recall that Regan's theory was a deontological theory, but it differed from Kant's deontology in that it said that the criteria for a being to have rights was just that they were was low-level mental capacities like sentience, memory, and things like that. So he's going to object to Regan's rights theory. Then he's also going to object to somebody who might make a utilitarian argument that we shouldn't be using animals for biomedical research, like an argument that Singer might put forward. We're going to be focusing mostly on his claim that animals do not have rights. That's going to be the biggest objection to the theories that we've read so far. So let's jump in. First, Cohen explains what a right is. So he says a right, properly understood, is a claim or potential claim that one party may exercise against another. The target against whom such a claim may be registered can be a single person, a group, a community, or perhaps all of mankind. So we could go more into talking about the different kinds of rights. They're often divided into negative rights, like the right to life is often thought of as a negative right. That's just a right that other people not kill me. They don't have to do anything special to uphold that right. They just have to refrain from killing me. And then we might talk about positive rights, like the right to a fair trial, the right to be defended by an attorney. That's a positive right in that other people have to do things to uphold my right to have an attorney defend me. Then rights are sometimes broken up along another axis. That's the axis of rights being natural rights, those we have just in virtue of being human beings, and privileges that are rights that we have in virtue of some legislative body telling us that we have them. We're not going to go too far into, in fact, that's all I'm going to say about the delineation of the different kinds of rights that we have. What we're going to focus on here is the second part of this definition. The target against whom a right can be registered is a single person, a group, a community, or perhaps all of mankind. Notice that the only beings that recognize rights are people, either a single person or multiple people. It would be weird to say that we have a right to life against a lion. If the lion is going to eat us, no appeal to our rights, natural or privileged, negative or positive, will be recognized by the lion. So rights can only be recognized by human beings. Now, why are we beings that have rights? Let's look at what Cohen says about this. So he says, the attributes of human beings from which this moral capability arises have been described variously by philosophers, both ancient and modern. The inner consciousness of the free will, the grasp by human reasons of the binding character of moral law, the self-conscious participation of human beings in an objective ethical order, human membership in an organic moral community, the development of the human self through the consciousness of other moral selves, and the underivative intuitive cognition of the rightness of an action. All interesting proposals. Most influential has been Immanuel Kant's emphasis on the universal human possession of a uniquely moral will and the autonomy its use entails. Humans confront choices that are purely moral. Humans, but certainly not dogs or mice, lay down moral laws for others and for themselves. Human beings are self-legislative, morally autonomous. So we talked extensively about that in the section on deontology in this class, that what distinguishes humanity from the rest of creation, according to Immanuel Kant, is our ability to be rational and our ability to be our autonomy. So our rationality and our autonomy. And our rationality is being able to figure out complex means to ends, and also being able to figure out if the way we take, the means that we take to get to our ends are morally permissible, so if they're like universalizable. And then our autonomy is the ability to be motivated by explicitly moral reasons. So to do the ability to be motivated by a consideration of what the right thing to do is, and to have that motivate our actions. So if we go up a little bit, he'll say, whatever else rights may be, therefore, they are necessarily human. Their possessors are persons, human beings. So let's read that whole paragraph. The differing targets, contents, and sources of rights and their inevitable conflict together weave a tangled web. Notwithstanding all such complications, this much is clear about rights in general. There are in every case claims or potential claims within a community of moral agents. Rights arise and can be intelligibly defended only among beings who actually do or can make moral claims against one another. So rights are reciprocal in this way. We have rights, we recognize other rights. You see a little bit of social contract theory here, or an echo of social contract theory. Whatever else rights may be, therefore, they are necessarily human. Their possessors are persons. So because we're the only beings that can recognize rights, we are the only beings that have rights, is his claim. And on the face of it, it seems initially like a very plausible argument. But it immediately runs into a problem, a familiar problem, because somebody might interpret his argument to be this. If an individual lacks the capacity for free moral judgment, so lacks rationality and autonomy, then he or she does not have moral rights. All animals lack the capacity for free moral judgment, therefore animals do not, or rationality and autonomy, therefore animals do not have rights. And if this was his argument, then he would be putting forward an argument just like Kant put forward, or just like the social contract theorists proposed. And that ran into obvious problems. The obvious problems arise because premise one can lead to an unwanted conclusion. There are many human beings who lack the capacity, who are not rational, are not autonomous. They lack free moral judgment. That's a shorthand for that. And the premise one says if they lack that, then they don't have moral rights. Two says, two here is about animals, but we could substitute. Those human beings, therefore, do not have those human beings don't have the capacity, aren't rational, aren't autonomous, don't have free moral thought. Therefore, those human beings do not have rights. So if Cohen was putting forth that argument, he would run into the same problem that Kant ran into, that contractarians run into, and that is that his theory would not guarantee rights for all human beings. It would guarantee rights for only human beings would have rights, but it wouldn't extend to all human beings. Those who lacked these capacities would not have rights. But Cohen thinks he has a fix for this problem that Kant and the social contract theorists have run into. So this is actually a misinterpretation of his argument. His actual argument adds a key phrase, and you'll see that's italicized here, is of a kind. So his argument actually goes, if an individual is of a kind that lacks the capacity for free moral judgment, then he or she does not have moral rights. Each animal is of a kind that lacks the capacity for free moral judgment. Therefore, animals do not have rights. So the fix, now that he proposes this argument against non-human animals, he can have a fix for human beings, what the literature calls marginal humans. So marginal humans is just a technical term, an unfortunate technical term that refers to human beings that do not have rationality, autonomy, are not able to recognize the social contract, etc., right? So his fix to get these other human beings into the moral community and get them rights will be this. If an individual is of a kind that has the capacity for free moral judgment, then he or she has moral rights. Each marginal human is of a kind that possesses the capacity for free moral judgment, namely human beings. I think he has throughout this paper the kind that he's speaking of is species membership. So since marginal human beings are members of a kind, human beings, and that kind has the capacity for free moral judgment, then he or she has moral rights. So, therefore, marginal humans have moral rights. So it seems to be, again, on the face of it, this seems to be a nice fix for the problems that Kant ran into and social contract theorists run into. What we're trying to get is moral rights for all and only human beings. The problem with Kant's theory and social contract theory, they got rights for only human beings, but not for all human beings. But with this kind of a kind language, Cohen seems to have rescued all human beings, even those who don't have the ability to recognize rights, because some of us do. They're sort of like grandfathered into the moral community because they're of a kind, where most of us, I guess, have the ability, are rational and autonomous. All right. So, seems good on the face of it. What are some potential problems? Why are we supposed to think that animals are not of a kind that has the capacity for free moral judgment, but that marginal humans are, even though they are unable to make moral judgments? Well, to answer this again is just explaining his theory. The kind that he has in mind is species. So, a lion is of a kind, whatever the technical name for the species of a lion is, that does not have there are no lions that recognize rights. They don't have this capacity for free moral judgment. Therefore, the lion does not. No lion has rights. Whereas even a human being who's not rational a child or a severely mentally disabled human being is of a kind that so is a human being, and human beings have the capacity for free moral judgment. Therefore, they get rights, even though they can't recognize rights. So let's get to some objections to this style of argument. First, what kind are we that would exclude animals but include all humans? That, again, would just be our species, Homo sapiens. But now note, we're of many kinds. We're not just, so why talk about species membership here? Why not talk about something higher up? So a kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, or genus. So we could make this argument such that, look, a lion is of a kind, vertebrates, and some vertebrates have free moral thought. So the lion gets rights even though the lion doesn't have free moral thought, because it's of a kind, vertebrates, and some of the members of that kind have this capacity for free moral thought. Now, all of the members that have the capacity to recognize rights, have free moral thought, are human beings, but why is species the morally relevant kind? Why aren't any other kind the morally relevant kind? So it seems that we could substitute some variables for Cohen's argument, and his argument would lead to the conclusion that in fact animals do have rights, because they're of some kind that where some of the members of that kind have the capacity for free moral thought, specifically vertebrates, right? Like human beings are vertebrates, we have the capacity for free moral thought, so anything else that's a vertebrate gets rights even though they don't have the capacity for free moral thought. So why prefer one kind that we are over the other kind that we are? So, or that animals are over another kind that they are. It seems like Cohen's saying being a member of some kind which has the capacity for free moral thought is sufficient for having moral rights. So even though not all of the kinds that animals are have the capacity for free moral thought, there are some that do, some members of some kinds that do. So why not just say, so then it seems if being a member of any kind that has the capacity for free moral thought is sufficient for having rights, then an animal is of many kinds that have the capacity for free moral thought, any of the kinds that they share with us. And Cohen doesn't give in his paper any reason to think that we should prefer to be talking about species instead of any other classification. So absent that, his claim is reduced to speciesism. This is the same charge that Singer levies against other moral thinkers and many human beings in general, is that they're speciesists. They think a species has some special moral force when it doesn't. It's not clear why it would. So let's make let's abstract this objection a little bit, put in some fancy variables, talk about some some cases in which this argumentative strategy would not work. So here's the basic structure of Cohen's argument. If an individual A is a member of some kind K, and some, most, or all of the other members of that kind K have some property C, and on the basis of having property C, they have some property R, then individual A has property R as well, even though A lacks property C. Now that's super abstract, but let's fill in these variables and maybe it'll make more sense. Let's consider individual A to be a member of this class. So individual A is a member of this class. The kind is members of this class. And some, most, or all of the members of this class have some property, that is, worked very hard in the class and did all the assignments. And on the basis of having the property of working very hard in this class and doing all the assignments, they have some property, that is, deserving of a passing grade. Then, individual A, who's a member of this class, has a property of deserving a passing grade, even though they might lack the property of having worked hard or doing all the assignments. Does that work? It seems definitely not, right? So being a member of a kind that has some property, and some members of that kind, on the basis of having that property, have a further property, to say that other members of that kind who don't have the first property, the like causal property, deserve the final property, it seems wrong. Let's try another example. Let's say individual A is a guard in a prison. He's a member of some kind K, that is, people in a prison. And some, most, or all of the members of the people in the prison have some property that they committed a crime. And on the basis of having committed a crime, they have the property of deserving, arguably, to be in a cell. Therefore, the prison guard has the property of deserving to be in a cell, even though the prison guard lacks the property of having committed a crime. That doesn't work. So many, many examples that we could fill in here would not, this argument wouldn't work for them. And it's really unclear why this argument form should hold for species when it doesn't hold for these examples. It's unclear why we should be talking about species instead of any of the other kinds of which non-human animals are. You could take different strategies to try to get all human beings into the moral community, to get them rights. You could say that infants have the ability for autonomy and rationality, but it's as yet unrealized. Infants could be moral agents in the sense that they aren't yet, but if certain events transpire, they will be. However, this could have implications for serious implications for other views. What about if we allow infants in the moral community and say they have full rights because they may develop free moral judgment? Well, what about abortions? It would seem that we would be prohibited from performing abortions because fetuses, even though they don't yet have the capacity for free moral thought, would eventually develop the capacity for free moral thoughts. It also could have implications for contraception. A combination of this sperm and egg, though it doesn't yet have the capacity for free moral thought, could develop the capacity for free moral thought. So maybe that combination has the rights of a fully rational adult human being. If we take this potential view, we have to talk about how much potential does a being need to have to be rational and autonomous in order for them to have rights. And note that still wouldn't get all human beings rights. There would still be some which could not have more rights. So those that are severely mentally disabled in a way that we don't know how to fix them, or we can't we can't make them rational and autonomous. We just don't, we aren't unable to. So those fixes won't be great. Let's note another issue with Cohen's argument. Imagine if all of a sudden a single mosquito, we could genetically engineer it such that a single mosquito was rational and autonomous, and it could give dissertations about why it should be harassing us and biting us and sucking our blood. Imagine we could do that with one mosquito. Well, on Cohen's argument, what now do we have to say about all mosquitoes? Do we have to say now that all mosquitoes have rights, even those that can't recognize rights, because they're of a kind and some members of that kind can? Maybe a response of his would be, well, most mosquitoes can't, so you have to have most beings of a kind have to have a certain capacity. So what if there were 10 mosquitoes in the world and we genetically engineered 6 of them to be rational and autonomous? Now the other 4 regular garden variety mosquitoes have rights because 6 mosquitoes have rationality and autonomy. That seems crazy. Mosquitoes not getting those rights, right? So he seems to have the wrong reason for why marginal human beings would have rights. He seems to have the wrong reason for why non-human animals lack rights. Better proposals. It seems that Regan's proposal here is still a better proposal, even though it leads to a pretty extreme view. His proposal being that it's just low-level mental capacities that allow a being to have the full suite of rights that we enjoy. Finally, let's look at Cohen's argument from Speciesism. The argument from Speciesism, or against Speciesism, goes like this. So, arguments that conclude that we are speciesist, Cohen wants to say, trade on the verbal similarities between racist, sexist, and speciesist. Speciesism, however, Cohen wants to say, makes correct moral distinctions based on morally relevant differences. Therefore, we should be speciesist. Experiments on animals lead to great benefits for humans. Even if we were not speciesist, we would still have to recognize that using animals in experiment can have more benefits than costs on a utilitarian analysis. Therefore, we should use animals in experiments, even and especially in those which harm them, if they have greater benefits that come out of them. Now, the last part of this, utilitarian, like Peter Singer, is going to say, yeah, we're not in principle against animal testing, just in those cases where it doesn't lead to more good. However, the first part of this argument, Singer is going to have some objections against. He's going to say speciesism does not make correct moral distinctions. It doesn't focus on morally relevant differences. We should just take the species talk completely out of it and focus on the relevant capacities. If the capacities are what make a difference for moral standing, then why have the middleman of species? It doesn't seem to be doing any work. It just seems like a nice shortcut to making sure that we only need to consider ourselves, or that we are more important. So it's a shortcut to self-aggrandizing morality. So let's sum up a little bit before we get to our quiz questions. There's a distinction sometimes made between moral agents and moral patients. Moral agents are those beings which are able to think morally and be motivated by moral considerations. So all of you who are watching this lecture, you're moral agents. And then people talk about moral patients. Moral patients are those beings that deserve our moral consideration in whatever form we think of. So some theories have groups of moral agents, groups of beings that are moral patients that are not moral agents. Theories like utilitarianism, like Regan's animal rights theory. Other theories have the only moral patients being moral agents. So social contract theory, possibly, and Kantian deontology. So in Kantian deontology, the only beings that deserve moral consideration, that the principle of humanity and universalizability apply to, are those beings that are rational and autonomous. So those beings that can recognize those principles. Cohen here is trying to allow that there are some moral patients that are not moral agents, specifically marginal human beings, and he tries to get them in to being moral patients, being beings that deserve moral consideration because they're members of a species, and that species contains moral agents. But the main objection to him will be, why talk about species membership at all? Why not talk about the capacities and reject all these biological? Why are these biological categories morally relevant? Why don't we just talk about the moral capacities, which are obviously morally relevant? So, I think that, then the other piece is, so he's trying to allow for some moral patients that are not moral agents, but not based on the capacities of those moral patients, just based on them being of a kind that has, where some members have that moral capacity. But his argument runs into problems in that there are non-human animals are members of many kinds, and they share some kinds with us. So why not allow them to be moral patients, even though they're not moral agents? In a similar way that he's allowing marginal humans to be moral patients, even though they're not moral agents. All right. So now let's get to 2 quiz questions. Quiz question number 1. Which beings can recognize rights? In other words, have the capacity for free moral thought. So which beings can recognize rights, not which beings have rights, should have rights, whatever. Which being can recognize that rights claims? Some human beings. A, some human beings. B, all human beings. Or C, all animals, including human beings. That's quiz question number 1. Quiz question number 2. Which kind is Cohen focusing on? A, kingdom, B, order, or C, species? Which kind is Cohen focusing on? Which kind does he think is the morally relevant kind? All right, thanks for sticking with this. So moving on, we'll be factoring these objections to theories that we've discussed into our thinking, and we'll be talking about some positions which might survive these criticisms. So thanks again for sticking with it, and I'll see you next time.